Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Coaches In. This is quite a new and different kind of webinar for me to try. So in the spirit of constant experimentation, then that's why we're going to try this. I look forward to getting your feedback after the webinar on whether we should do this again. So first things first, I'd like to do a quick sound check for those of you who know how to use the GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar technology. If you could please raise your hand and let me know that you can hear me loud and clear, that would be great. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to put everyone's hands down now. Okay, so let's get into this. For those of you who are new, we have a couple new people on the phone. There's one thing that's important this time if you're going to be unmuted that I don't normally focus on. So you do have two different panels to look at. You've got your screen with the slides on it, and then you also have a control panel. If you want to hide that control panel, if you've got a more narrow monitor and want to hide it, just click on the double arrow. It'll be hidden, and then if you want to click it again, it'll come back. Also, if you're going to be unmuted today, then if you don't have a mic and you're listening to me on speakers, you're going to need to hang up or disconnect and then reconnect with the telephone using an audio pin. So if you're listening with speakers and you want to speak, you're going to need to have a microphone, or you'll need to log back in using the telephone. And when you do the audio pin, you use pound sign and then the number and pound sign. So please make sure if you're going to be unmuted that you have the ability to speak. Then as far as asking questions, here's what our game plan is going to be today. We have 10 questions that have been submitted in advance that I'm going to go through, and then if we have time at the end, we'll go ahead and take some additional questions. Feel free to ask questions throughout, but please know that I may not be able to get to them. And we have one person that couldn't attend at the last minute, so we may only go through 9 of the questions. If you do want to ask a question, you can either raise your hand and then I'll unmute you, or you can type it into the question log. I'd recommend for this particular webinar you just type it into the question log, since we will be having people unmuted throughout the session. As you exit the webinar, if you would provide feedback, please. Last time I got some comments that so many people didn't get the survey, and I called the GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar folks and tech support. They said there was no reason why people shouldn't have been getting it, so they weren't quite sure what was going on. So if you don't get it when you log out using File and then Exit and Webinar, I'm not sure what might be going on with that. It's not on my end. It may be on their end. So the first thing I want to talk about is a little bit about the coaching versus mentoring relationship. This webinar I'm trying to solve multiple needs here in one webinar. One is that I get lots of great questions from people throughout the weeks that I think it'd be good for the whole group to hear my response to some of them and talk through some of the options you have in your leadership roles in the improvement world. But I also want to practice coaching. I think we all have to practice coaching, and coaching is tough. Well, especially most of us that go into this line of work tend to be fairly type A personalities, and we've grown up in a Western world where telling was the way we accomplished work. And so I just wanted to practice coaching. And I think one of the things I've learned about coaching is that it's very helpful to be extremely mindful of when you're in coaching mode and when you're in mentoring mode. So it's a little bit of a nuance between the two, but I think it's an important one. When you're coaching, if you look at the left side of the slide, the coachee is basically sharing their wisdom through the process of asking questions. The coach is asking questions, usually Socratic questions, and those are the questions that can't be answered with a simple yes or no. They're probing questions that are designed very specifically to get the coachee thinking and drawing on their own wisdom. And that's a very respectful way of teaching, is that coaching mode. And it's what we all have a strong obligation to help our managers and leaders in organizations become more proficient in. When you're mentoring, you are in a telling mode, so you're basically relaying information, your own wisdom, back to the mentee. It's important to mentor. You don't want to do all coaching, because if a mentee or the person you're working with doesn't understand how to do something and they've never been trained to do something, obviously you're going to have to start with a training kind of model. So in today's call, I will try to mention to you when I'm very clearly in coaching mode and when I'm clearly in mentoring mode, and then my guess is you will catch me in mentoring mode when I think I'm in coaching mode, and that's great awareness for you to carry on with your own work and being more self-aware of when you're a coach and when you're a mentor, and trying to get more and more of your work being in the coaching domain. So as far as those of you who've offered, and thank you very much for those of you who submitted questions and have agreed to be unmuted. It's a brave thing to do, and I really appreciate it. So this is the order that we're going to be going in today. The only thing that will deviate from that is if someone is suddenly not available and we have to change the order around. So this gives you a little bit of a lineup on where you're going to be in the group today. I ordered the questions for various reasons. It was strategic. I think that the first one or two get us off in two different directions, and then there were themes for the rest of them that were similar but different, and I wanted to thread within the webinar. I wanted to thread, culture and resistance questions with technical questions, and then leadership questions, and have it so it's not all one type of content in the beginning or the end. Okay, and so we are going to start with Frank. Now, Frank is in a large group today, so he's asked not to be unmuted because it would be distracting to them. But he asked a great question that I get asked a lot about education, lean training, and that type of thing. So Frank's question is, what is the best approach for lean education for executives, managers, and staff? And kudos to Frank for identifying that there are indeed 3 different groups within an organization that need to get some sort of lean development. That is spot on. Executives, managers, and you can define manager however works best for your organization. Sometimes it's supervisors, managers, and directors. Sometimes it's managers and directors. Sometimes directors go into the senior leadership realm. But there are 3 distinct groups: the front lines, the people who manage them more directly, and then the senior leaders that are overseeing vision, mission, strategy in the organization. So the question is, should everyone in the organization have some knowledge? Absolutely. I'm going to be a mentor at this point and say absolutely. Since Frank's not on the line, actually I will be in mentoring mode the entire time because you have to have someone else present in order to be a coach. So 4,000 employees is a lot of employees, and it does require that everyone have some knowledge. Now the question is how much? And then his other question about, is it better to train a few deeply and then let them spread lean throughout the organization? Both of those are great questions, and I'm going to give you a little bit of information to seed this conversation. If you want a copy of these slides, I will put them on my Facebook site after, or SlideShare site after the webinar. I only have a couple that are really even worth posting, but I will put those on both SlideShare and my Facebook site. So if you look at the research on what people retain and how they retain it when they've been through some sort of education process, obviously we want to get more and more toward people having direct involvement in problem solving, because they retain 95% of the learning when they're in that fully engaged mode. When people are reading, hearing, and seeing, you can see up here they're only retaining a very small percentage of the information. So we want to get more and more of the work that we're doing with folks into the lower echelons here, where they're discussing, experiencing, and problem solving directly. When it comes to classroom education, I don't know how many of you are aware, but I have a master's in adult education, which I opted for in lieu of an MBA because I just was always drawn toward teaching and felt that I would be more effective in the business world if I was effective as a teacher, and that's the path I chose to take. It's a little bit of a bizarre path, but it has served me, I think, pretty well. So when you are in a classroom environment, you can create some of these lower echelon experiences. For example, you can create a lot of discussion in class, and experience can happen through simulation and getting people actually doing tasks that they're learning the theory first and then they're practicing. So learn, do is the way to go. And then you can even get them involved in problem solving in the class if you have a problem or some sort of project built into the curriculum so that they're learning and doing and learning and doing, learn, apply. So the ones, if you're in a classroom experience, this hearing and seeing is only going to get you a little bit, but in some cases that's all you need. So for example, if you take a look at this slide here, we may want to only give general awareness to a certain bulk of the organization. So general awareness might be a matter of them understanding terminology, understanding the basic principles of lean, basic concepts, and understanding what the organization's approach is going to be on how it goes about implementing lean. And in that case, you don't need to have a very extensive classroom training with projects and days or weeks long approach. It may be a matter of a 4-hour or 2-hour even overview. Time matters in education, so you have to make sure your learning objectives are very much aligned with the time that people are being given and the structure under which they're being given to learn. So any classroom instruction, in my opinion, should absolutely have, at the conclusion of this program or this activity or this workshop or this class, participants will be able to, and then you complete the sentence. And you need to make sure that whatever is at the end of that sentence, that you're providing the environment for that to be achieved. So if your objective, for example, is that participants will be able to recognize basic concepts, recognize some basic types of waste, understand lean terminology, understand the principles of lean, that's a whole different ballgame from being able to, use value stream mapping or facilitate value stream mapping. There's all those different levels. So as you work through from general awareness to master status, it's going to require more and more time and more classroom and project-based work. So then I'm going to go back for a second. The question is, going back here to this, what the different levels of retention are, is that classroom training is only mildly effective even when it has projects built into it and it has simulations and all those activity-rich environments. Classroom instruction it's like a lab. You're basically taking things out of the real world and putting them into this fake environment, and it is very valuable for learning, but it can't be the sole means that people learn. So if you think about those of you that are familiar with A3 problem solving, when you're in a real problem environment and you're working on a real problem, people are much more likely to learn and learn deeply than they are in a classroom. So for most organizations, getting back to Frank's question, there needs to be a combination of this classroom development and awareness generation, selling people on the concepts of lean and what's in it for them to, even start beginning to think lean, and that real life, real problem solving development. Now, the question about training a few deeply and letting them spread lean, if you want to spread it quickly, you have to do that because there just isn't enough time to get through a large workforce to learn very, very deeply through experience. What I am very concerned about, though, are the number of organizations who create what I consider an elitist perspective to improvement. So, not to bash overly on the Six Sigma model, but I guess I will. This whole black belt, green belt, yellow belt thing with people leading improvement, that is not the effective way to shift culture. It is not the effective way to get the workforce engaged. It is not an effective way. It's not how Toyota operates. It's not how organizations that are well-oiled machines operate and are very, very strong continuous improvement organizations. You have to, get all the knowledge that black belts, green belts, yellow belts, white belts have and impart that to the entire workforce. So this represents a very big shift in how a lot of organizations have approached continuous improvement, where they create an elitist group that does all the doing and they're not serving as strongly in the teacher role as they need to be. So what I think is very necessary is in the beginning days of a transformation, so let's say lean transformation, I think it is important to have a few experts that are in the improvement specific role, but their purpose in being there needs to be to teach managers as quickly as possible how to be proficient problem solvers, how to be proficient coaches, and how to lead in the way that Toyota leadership, for example, leads internally. So the elite few that are in the beginning need to eventually go away. I mean, if you're really becoming a good, solid, lean organization, eventually that team should be absorbed into the workforce once an organization is, fully ingrained and it's into the DNA of the organization, which could take years and years and years and years. It does take years and years. But that should be the ultimate direction and goal if you have that elite few, is that they are teachers. They are teachers first and foremost. And this is something I speak to industrial engineers a lot, and I'm constantly saying, look, your role is changing. Your role as the expert is shifting into the role as the expert who can teach that stuff. And that we are at a crossroads here, and organizations that choose to develop their management and leadership teams so that everyone becomes a proficient problem solver are the ones that are going to soar, and those that don't will not. And as far as education being costly, I view the workforce as a appreciating asset, and so absolutely you have to invest in people. They are probably the most, well, not probably, they're the most important asset there is. And so I think it's interesting when you have a leadership team that's very budget sensitive, when it comes to the basic training that people need to be successful, that's investing in an asset. And if you have high turnover and you're questioning whether that investment makes sense, I would get to the root cause of why you have high turnover and really try to figure out what are those reasons. And it may be because employees aren't fully engaged, they aren't well developed, they don't feel like their needs are being taken care of. Who knows? I'm not passing judgment. I'm just saying if you've got turnover, I would get to the root of that before I would start, cutting costs on training and that type of thing. So I hope that helps a little bit. I do think that we are moving into a new world, and we're learning, much more about how Toyota really does operate and what the role of their frontline team leads and managers are. They actually don't call them managers, but they're team leads. It's very much a teaching environment, a learning organization. Okay, so a couple books if you want to get a little more deeply into learning the role of the manager so we can understand what kind of education we have to give. Managing to Learn and Understanding A3 Thinking talk a lot about the coaching role that leaders play, and Toyota Kata talks a lot about coaching as well. So I hope that helped a little bit. Frank, if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to jot those in as we continue on, and I'll get back to those. So how do I deal? This is now Julie, and Julie, I am going to unmute you. Let me find you. Let's see, here you are. Julie, are you there?
Good morning, I am.
Hi, I feel like this is a radio show. Okay, so this is a great question. How do I deal with individuals who are not willing to be lean? So a couple things that you mentioned in your explanation to me, that they talk the talk but don't walk the walk. And I was intrigued with this line that individuals refuse to participate, for example, in the last planner process. So this is a construction environment. Ignoring data in A3s because it isn't what they want to do. That's interesting. And reverting to silos and withdrawing from conversations. So let's do an attempt here to do some good coaching. Let's talk about individuals who refuse to participate. Can you give me examples of how that plays out?
Sure. I think I'll use the last planner process that's shown there on the screen. We have individuals who believe that they are the experts in their particular field and the particular item that they are doing, and they believe that they can plan their own work in a vacuum, and that they do not need to share that information with the rest of the team, nor do they need to get any input from the team. Other than they want to continue to send, say, 52 emails in order to get feedback from other people on their needs, usually on a last-minute basis. So we have a room with a bunch of people that are doing last planner. They're talking about constraints. They're talking about the tasks that they have to do to achieve the milestone. And you've got a few people standing there with their arms crossed who just refuse to put a single sticky note on the board to tell other people what they're doing and what they need.
Okay, so where is your organization in terms of its lean journey? What all have you done so far to expose people to it?
So we're as a construction industry, We are still not very far along on our lean journey. However, we've been lucky to have several clients that have fully embraced an integrated process for developing and building their projects. So in those specific projects, we have had the luck to be able to have a team that are all tied to the same, contracts are very important in construction, all tied to the same contract with the same goals for the team, including lean learning, lean education, and working in a collaborative nature. So in this case, we have a team that's further along on their lean journey than either my company or the industry as a whole.
Okay. What have you done in terms of the last planner process, in terms of leaning it, documenting it, training on it? What specifically on that, when you have these people that are refusing, I'm curious to know what they've been exposed to in terms of defined process and standard work around that.
Sure. Yeah, the team went through a very detailed, not only the theory, more of an overview. They went through detailed training. They've also had facilitators both internal to the team, facilitators who have a lot of experience on lean projects. There's a few facilitators who have less experience, and then there's also been some outside consultants who've come in on the teams to help the team, and they've also facilitated and tried to walk everyone through, walk individuals through. They've done individual coaching with certain people, and there's been quite an exposure to the training, coaching, mentoring side of things. And on the other hand, the team's been highly exposed on at least a weekly basis to what are the results of doing the last planner, using the last planner process. What happens to us when we fall down, and where can we go? How great can we be if we follow this process and we really use it? So they've gotten the "Hey, we're doing great" lectures. They've gotten the "Boy, no one met their commitments" lectures. So there's been a lot of discussion and interaction.
What the folks that are refusing, have they been through the training and the indoctrination into lean?
Yes.
Okay. So when they refuse, what do you think is behind that? Why are they refusing?
I'm sure that it's that basic. Well, I shouldn't say I'm sure, but I'm fairly confident that part of the issue is the trust factor. So despite the fact that this is also a team that's had significant discussions about trust, done team building activities, both structured and just let's go out and have some fun and get to know each other. And I think another piece of it is there are still some really big egos in the room and in the industry, and those egos get in the way as well.
On I think you gave me a little example of how they don't put a Post-it on the wall or something to document where they're at. Is that part of the standard work process, that you need to put the Post-it on the wall?
It is, because they're using the Post-its to then identify their constraints, what they need from other parties, so that we can truly visually map out the process to get to that milestone. So
they've been through the training. It's part of the process. Who's managing the process? Who's the process owner?
We have one person who does facilitate, and then also is the I'll say the gatekeeper who structures all the information into a particular program that can then share the reporting of how are we doing, who's committed to what, did they meet those commitments, etc. So that one person is really handling that, but it's more of a task basis, while also occasionally trying to lead that process as far as giving everyone on the team the feedback of how we're doing. So I think another factor here is that there's not really another individual on the team or a core team member that they're not really stepping up to say, okay, this person needs to do this, or A, go away, or B, we get them fixed, or however you want to say that.
Well, I think, I mean, what intrigues me is root cause always. Root cause analysis doesn't apply just to processes. It very much applies to people. So, why are they refusing? Do they not understand the process? There's usually, I mean, not usually, there's always a reason why people do things. So I'd want to get into why the person is refusing. And the way that I think might be some opportunity there is, having a person actually managing the process so that the process is behaving, it's performing as it should. The minute it's not, figuring out why, and that gets you back to root cause. We have a target condition, and it's that people do X, Y, and Z. We've got a current condition, X, Y, and Z are not occurring. Why the gap? What's the root cause of that? And I think we often will kind of stay on the surface when we see a problem and not dig deeply and peel back the layers of the onion into why. Usually, I mean, almost always when I get someone one-on-one and I start asking them why they're not doing a particular task that's part of the standard work, there's actually a really good reason. It's not usually because they want to mess with the company. And then you just, do whatever countermeasures necessary to remove that reason, and then you usually have the problem solved. So I don't find people are refusing just for refusal's sake, typically. There's usually something either environmentally, culturally, management-wise, or specific to the process, very, very tactical, that's causing them to not follow standard work. But process ownership, I think, is a big, you're going to hear from someone in just a minute who's a process owner, and what it's doing to their organization is phenomenal as far as having one person really minding the store. So
Okay. I'll definitely share that with them.
Yeah, I would try to get to root cause. Sometimes we're afraid to even have these very direct conversations, and sometimes it's very easy to fix, process problems by having a conversation with someone and finding out what's causing them to behave the way they're behaving. So that's just some things I would try. And I would love to keep talking, but I want to make sure we get to all the questions. So if you want to talk a little more offline, feel free to let me know.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Julie. I'm going to go ahead and mute you again. Okay, so let's go on now to Audrey. Speaking of process owner. So Audrey, where are you? Let's see. Let me come back up here. Audrey, there you are. I'm going to unmute you. Audrey, are you there?
I am, yes. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Audrey. How are you doing? So next question is, can you discuss the best explanation of root cause versus reason? So in this case, Audrey has supervisors that have been trained on the 5 whys, and the associates that report to them, they work with whenever there's a problem. And it sounds as, ooh, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Okay, can you hear me, Audrey?
Yes, but I do hear a little feedback.
Huh. You know what? I'm going to mute you again for a moment, and I'm going to talk, and then, let's see. Actually, it sounds better. Did you just do something?
I muted you.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to have to mute you. I'm so sorry. There's some kind of feedback. I don't know what's going on, but let me go ahead and mute you. Darn it, I wanted to do a good coaching thing there. Anyway, so I'll do a one-way communication as far as some ideas. One of the things, when I'm teaching root cause analysis, one of the things that I ask people to do is to just not stop until they can't answer the question anymore. So when they stop at the first or second reason, we're actually, working with them one-on-one, and sometimes they're paired up in a classroom situation where they're not allowed to stop at 1 or 2 because you're in a classroom and that's part of the activity. But by them experiencing how much more there is to the story, by being kind of forced to go to the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th reason, then they go, aha. And that experience is what helps them realize that they are stopping prematurely. So I would recommend that you get a real situation, and that perhaps you could serve as a second coach, so you could have the supervisor and the associate together, and then you or someone else is with them, and have them go through root cause. And when they're tempted to stop at reason number 2, for example, coach them and ask them questions like, do you think there's let me see, what would be a good question? you seem to be assuming that this is the answer to the question of why. What if we ask the question one more time and see if there's something more to the story, and have them just go through and ask the question again and again. So I liken it also, I think you've probably heard me say this, but I'll repeat it. I liken it to looking at a crime scene. When these investigators go out to a crime scene, the question is, how do they know when to stop gathering evidence? Well, part of it's gut, and they're experienced and they know, and that experience comes from doing it more and more and more, repetitive practice. But part of it also comes from not being able to answer the question. So when they're going through, let's say someone makes an error on a letter and they're going through, why'd you make the error? And I think the example you used is that reason 2, they'll say, well, I didn't use the checklist. If you're with them and you prompt them to ask the question again, well, why didn't you use the checklist? Then you're going to start getting to the 3rd, the 4th, and possibly the 5th reason. And it could be 6 or 7 for that matter. But I think they have to experience it. They have to experience the fact that they stopped prematurely, and doing it one-on-one is probably the most effective way to do it, and a classroom might be the other way to do it, is to have exercises where you actually have people experience it. So I'm going to unmute you for 1 second and see if we can just do a quick follow-up here, voice to voice. Okay, how does it sound?
Can you hear me, Karen?
I can.
Can you hear me, Karen?
Oh, it's really echoey. Well, let's go ahead. What do you think about that response, and is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Okay, is this better when I talk now?
It is.
Okay, great. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but even after a couple of months and giving that one-on-one coaching, as I get these types of answers, halfway through they're stopping, and then I'll go back, to the supervisor and say, did you think about asking, this next question? And I'll give you a good example. In reviewing a letter, one of the associates had a typographical error, and the supervisor had listed on our spreadsheet that the root cause was because she didn't use her checklist. And so I said, did you ask her why they didn't use the checklist? And because when they stopped at that point of they didn't use the checklist, that's really the reason why the error didn't get caught.
Right.
But the reason that the error was made to begin with. So that I'm having a really hard time trying to explain this is a reason something happened, but not the root cause.
Yeah, when you asked the question, I pondered that for a while. I wonder if they're getting confused and whether just simplifying it and maybe get reason out of their vocabulary and focus just on the word root cause or the term root cause. I wonder if that would help them, that if they haven't gotten to the true root, that's what they need to be going for versus the reason. I don't know whether that was in your training program or not, but I wonder if just getting that word reason out of the way and focusing just on root cause, if that simplification might help them a little bit.
I don't know. I'll certainly try that. I mean, we didn't use the word reason when we were doing the training. We specifically focused on root cause and even went into detail on what the root cause is. What is root cause? We gave the definition.
Right. So when you went back to him or her and asked why they didn't ask it again, what did you get as an answer?
Originally, the associate stated that she just missed it and she was focused on something else. And
the associate or the supervisor?
This is what the supervisor told me that the associate told them when they went back. Because when I coach a supervisor, I'll say, why didn't she use the checklist? Is there something about the checklist that needs to be updated? Why did she only focus on part of the checklist? Because that was the second thing he said when he come back. She used it, but she only focused on part of it. Well, then why?
Right. So when you asked the supervisor why they didn't ask the why question again, what did the supervisor say?
They thought they did what they were supposed to.
So that indicates to me well, actually, let me be a coach and not a mentor. What does that indicate to you, that answer?
That they haven't received enough training on how to get to root cause.
Yeah, you know and by the way, for those of you listening, did you see how I caught myself and how the question changed? That's a big difference between mentoring and coaching. So I just wanted to make sure you caught that. That is a great question, and when you ask that question and you get the answer that indicates that they don't understand it deeply, what I liken it to is someone who knows how to do 2 plus 2, but they don't understand why they're doing 2 plus 2. They don't understand why 4 is the answer. And so it may be that you have to get that person digging a little deeper into why root cause is so critical and what happens, and possibly work through 2 different scenarios. One where they decide to do some sort of a countermeasure, implement some sort of a countermeasure based on the fact that the employee didn't use the checklist, versus the countermeasure they would do when they find the real reason why the employee didn't use the checklist. So in the first case, it's employee-centric. In the second case, it's process or system-centric. And maybe helping them understand that. So I would go back and have a greater so you guys are going to be doing training soon, and I know we're going to have a call about that. I would recommend that you build into the curriculum some activities that will help them experience that premature stopping versus continuing on, and that you're building in there some clear examples of how the, quote, solution, I call it a countermeasure, how what you put in place will vary dramatically based on whether you get to true root cause or not.
Okay.
You have an email. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Audrey. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Okay. Let's move on to the next one. I see the time, and I'll try to go a little more quickly through these. Wendy, you are okay to unmute. Let's find you. Wendy Davis, there you are. Oops, there you go. Hi, Wendy.
Hello. Hello?
Hi, Wendy. How are you?
I'm good. Can everybody hear me? I'm on the phone.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. Okay, great.
Can you hear me now? Okay,
Yeah.
so you had a question about Kaizen events. Actually, your question was very interesting because I saw your question around Kaizen events as having 2 components to it. One being that you're having difficulty getting people to agree to make time for them and that they're using them as a one-time fix. And then one is more of the mechanics of a Kaizen event where they're possibly not following through once the countermeasure has been implemented. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly correct.
So what have you done? I need to understand a little bit about your organization. What have you done to expose everyone to Lean and expose them to when you use a Kaizen event, why you use a Kaizen event, and those kinds of things?
Okay, well, we have a very large organization. We're in higher education, so we have very diverse departments and offices. So our method of we started small. We had a consultant here for a couple of years who did one-on-one training with a core couple of departments who've been really great and really have are well on their way on their Lean journey and have been doing really great things. And as our contract ended with the consultant, and we've been trying to go with the knowledge that we've gained through that experience, a position was created, an office was created to kind of coordinate this. So we do have a training, an overview training that's done a couple times a year, and that's typically new staff or employees who are going to be on a Kaizen event. But then generally it's just we're keeping up with the momentum still from the consultant, and we have probably external of those departments who are practicing Lean daily. We probably have about 2 Kaizens a month starting up, and that's where where we're trying to grow our program is through the Kaizen event, kind of set the stage, the jumping off point for people to gain an understanding of what Lean is and what removing waste and what improvements can look like.
So why do you, if you could give me an example of how you know that folks are not wanting to make time for them, what happens? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think it varies from department to department. We have areas who have done 1 or 2 Kaizen events. They've seen it through to the end, are very happy with the improvements. That's where it ends. They're really excited. They have all these ideas for new events that they want to take on. They just cease to make the time for them, even though they've...
I'm sorry, who's
Yep,
facilitating those Kaizen events?
We have a group of internal facilitators that were trained through our consultant.
Okay. What is their current role in the follow-through stages of a Kaizen event?
It's changing. We are growing and learning as we go. And we've really come a long ways with our follow-through. I will say that our facilitators, myself being one, have made some big improvements in the way we initiate a Kaizen event and talk about the roles of the team leader in what they need to do to carry out the event. And we're making some changes, but that probably is one of the problem areas we're facing right now, is identifying what that facilitator does at the end of a Kaizen event.
What type of standard work do you have in place for how you're rolling the Kaizen events and executing them throughout the organization?
The standard process would be to come through the process improvement office. A facilitator is assigned, and then that facilitator meets with the departments to kind of do a lot of the pre-work and the planning and talk about metrics and fill out the A3 or the profile sheet to kind of jumpstart the thinking, and then plan the 1 to 5 day event, whatever is decided is needed. And then there is that follow-through after that event that is hit or miss, I would say.
So I'm still a little confused about the follow-through. So what is the current rule or standard work around the facilitator's role in follow-through? I guess I'm struggling to find out why the follow-through isn't happening, and I'm worried that it might be about there's no ownership on that.
Okay. Well, currently the follow-through is we have a report-out event. That's where the team at the last day of the Kaizen event puts together I'm sorry about that, a report-out presentation that includes an implementation plan for leftover tactics, as well as collecting post-metrics and things like that. But it seems that once that Kaizen event and that report-out happens, that newspaper, even though it's there, even though there are people responsible for those tasks, they've already benefited enough from the improvements that were made that those few little tasks and things kind of just fall to the wayside as they return to normal routine.
So who owns the newspaper? And for those of you who are not familiar with that terminology, it's what's also referred to as the 30-day list. So who's responsible for the newspaper? Who owns it?
Team leader. So the owner of the problem of the project.
Okay. And who's monitoring the team leader?
At the end of the Kaizen event,
Mm-hmm.
that's the missing link.
That might be the missing link.
Yeah.
Because someone needs
talked about.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to go off.
No, I was just thinking that you might be, needing to get it into the DNA of the organization, that at the end of the event, this is the prescribed, standard work for moving through the newspaper and getting all those loose ends completed and fully implemented. And, someone needs to be kind of watching over that process, and the improvement office is probably the best to make sure that that's happening. But I like the fact that you've got a owner that's part of the department that did the Kaizen event that's actually following through on the newspaper and not you guys. I like that a lot. I think that starts passing that baton from the facilitator to the people who actually do the work, and that's the right thing to do. So that part of it sounds really well designed. So do you think that maybe just adding a little more teeth in having the improvement person that facilitated it follow up with the team lead?
Absolutely. We've actually just last month we process map our standard process for initiating a Kaizen event, and we had all of our facilitators together to kind of talk about things that are working, what's not working, and ways we can improve on that. And we focused very heavily on the planning stage.
All right, good.
So and we did trail off towards the end, that follow through. So while I'd like to say it's the team leaders who are trailing off, I think we all have.
Yeah. So do you have my book, at the risk of plugging my book, The Kaizen Event Planner?
I do, the event planner. Yeah.
Take a look at the sustainability section where it suggests a model where the facilitator, the team lead, and the team themselves meet once a week, either by phone or in person, for 4 weeks after the Kaizen event to work through the newspaper, the 30-day list, and to keep that momentum going, because that becomes a good practice to implement post every Kaizen event.
Okay.
And I think it'll keep them moving forward. We didn't get to making time for them. I think that one, I just will say one quick thing because I'd like to move on to another question. If the Kaizen events are seemingly urgent enough and they're tied to a big problem and everyone knows what they're tied to, it becomes less likely that people can say, we don't have time for that. So the sense of urgency around it, I think, becomes a big lever in getting people behind it and finding that they are painful. They are absolutely painful implementation models, Kaizen events. But if you don't do that, then something can drag on for months and sometimes even years without improvement, where you could slay it in 5 days. So that sense of urgency becomes a really important one, and tying it to some sort of larger strategy, is kind of linked to that sense of urgency.
Okay.
I'd recommend that as well. And then I wanted to talk about the manager being the stopgate, but I have to move on to the next question. So if you want to talk offline, we could maybe have a few more minutes about that.
Okay.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Karen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, I can see that 10 questions is going to be tough to get done in an hour. I actually can stay on for another half hour if some of you want to stay on as well, but I'll try to move through these more quickly. Okay, Andrew, we are up with you. So let me move up here, find you and unmute you. Oh, there you are. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Karen. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So your question is about being less than 2 years in the lean journey and having all these clay pigeons, I love that metaphor, flying in the air. What do you shoot at? And is it best to go kind of more superficial and broadly, or much more narrowly and deeply? Good question. So I won't go into the training and education piece because I sort of addressed that in the first question, but I guess the question that I think is worth us having some conversation around is this whole thing about projects and culture change and Gemba walks and how do you spread the wealth. So I think you have to do both broad and deep, and I'm not an either or kind of gal on this. So I have a question for you, a couple questions for you on where you're at. What's happening right now in terms of larger strategy and looking at where improvement needs to happen to meet some sort of annual business goals, or something, tying it to a larger strategy? Are you doing that?
We're trying to get to a point where we want to do more of the value stream mapping, so looking at those big chunks, but it seems we're more on the, I guess, the tactical end, where we're doing some of the day-to-day warfare and getting entrenched in those projects without, we're still trying to spread our wings to get into more of the large projects to look at those, but it seems we're still caught up in some of the day-to-day pieces as well. So we're pretty broad and somewhat deep at the same time, but we still can do better, of course.
Yeah, so I'm going to be clearly a mentor for a moment here. The way that we're learning more and more about how Toyota operates and how to tackle this continuous improvement quagmire that we're all in, the way that or the way that I feel works best in an organization is to approach it either from, here's a value stream that's got a lot of opportunity for improvement, let's work on that, or here's a problem, let's work on that. And the problem may or may not require value stream mapping. So if you take the former, the value stream approach, it would be a situation of still starting with an identified problem. Here's the value stream, here's how we wish it would perform, here's how it is performing, now we've got a gap, how do we fix it? And you start with value stream mapping and identify the opportunities to streamline, create flow, reduce errors, all that stuff. And that is one way to go. The other way is to look at, we've got this organizational problem, and let's just start with an A3 and identify the problem very clearly, and then look at our target condition, our current condition, all of those things, and work through it that way. I'm finding more and more organizations are having greater success with the problem identification approach, where they're just starting with a problem, and then the workforce development comes through working through that problem. So if you have a problem where you've assigned a problem owner and a coach, assuming you've got skilled coaches internal, then all the people that are on that team in resolving that problem that's being worked through with the A3 are developing, and they're learning lean, they're learning by doing. So the more you can get, this is the thing that we have all, I think, missed a lot of in the past few years, is that it's about solving problems. And so if you start with identifying the problem first and get all the education to follow as people are actually solving problems, it's much deeper education. So I think you want to avoid more classroom training until you've gotten a lot of successes under your belt and have actually solved problems, to demonstrate and get everyone much more clear that this stuff really does work. And I just think that solving some problems is where to spend your time right now.
Yeah, I would agree. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would go big. I would go on big problems and work through them, and then you can go superficial as you get leaders trained to coach. You can go more superficial and move it to the front lines, because then they'll be able to coach their own frontline staff and do the little daily kaizens that you need to really get to in order to evolve the culture. But it doesn't happen overnight. I think starting with some problems that are pretty big and pesky is a way to demonstrate the value of lean and then move it into the organization. Does that make sense?
That sounds great. Thanks, Karen.
I'm sorry I didn't coach. All right. Thanks, Andrew.
No problem. Lots of good stuff. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Okay. All right. So now I had a question come in from someone who wishes to remain anonymous. And I just wanted to talk a lot about this. Of all the questions that I was asked, this one was the one that pained me the most, because I sensed and felt the disempowerment that this person is feeling. And it's actually fairly common when you're in an improvement capacity to feel like you don't have any clout and you're not getting leadership support, and it's difficult to get results. And I do talk with people a lot about this. But in this particular case, there was some pretty strong statements, things like, I have no power, I get easily rattled, I am frustrated, senior leaders mute to supporting me. Those kinds of things I think are, they pain me to hear those. So I think probably in this case, some actual individual development might be the best approach first, and then deal with some of the larger organizational issues, environmental issues that are causing an environment that makes it much more difficult. So I have some suggestions to our anonymous questioner. My experience is that confidence is built through success, and I think one of the things that has been most helpful for me in developing confidence has been this kind of relentless reflection. And it's not reflection where you see what you've done that you could do more, you could do better at, and beating yourself up about it. It's reflection, seeing what you could do better at, and then deciding an action plan to improve. So it's a much less emotional and much more kind of pragmatic view of, okay, here's what happened, Here's where I feel like I need some development. Here's what I'm going to do about it. So it's a little more matter of fact. Toastmasters, for example, is a great organization for improving communication, being able to kind of think on your feet and be in the moment. So that's one organization that I'd look into, no matter how shy you are, no matter how insecure you're feeling. Something like Toastmasters would be great. I also think that professional help is something to consider, whether it be the Western model of therapy, the Eastern model of meditation and yoga, a religious model of seeking pastoral care. I mean, whatever makes sense for you and fits well with you, I think that professional help is needed. Lack of confidence, it happens for good reason. There's a reason for it. Again, back to root cause. There's always a reason. And so getting to the root of the lack of confidence it's not something that we can always tackle on our own. And having that objective eye helping you, I think, would be a couple steps. It would move you a couple steps forward. The other thing I find as far as confidence is knowing your stuff. So the person who submitted this relayed a situation where she went and got a bunch of data together for an improvement, went and presented it to management, and then management changed the kind of data that they wanted to see, and they said the data didn't agree with their data, and then she was sent back to go get more data. And so one of the things that would be helpful, I think, is to really understand the problem you're trying to solve and really understand what the data is and isn't telling you, so that when you get into those meetings, you can defend the data and you can, defend. And I don't mean defense in a bad way. I mean, knowledgeable defense, like defending a position when you're going through a PhD. You defend your position. If you're comfortable with the data, it will be more difficult for them to get you off target or off kilter. It'll be more difficult for leaders to kind of push back as you were relaying. And then I also think, while you don't want to hear anything about practicing, I think if you practice before you get in the moment, practice what your approach is going to be and how you're going to present the data, and, getting more methodical perhaps about that may be another avenue to get you so you feel confident and you don't get thrown off base as easily. And then there are the in-the-moment techniques. There's digesting, hearing something and before speaking, using silence as your friend, letting silence sit in the room for a moment and think before you speak, and to gather your thoughts and gather your composure. Breathing. I mean, we often don't breathe when we get in those situations, and that never helps. So just using some in-the-moment techniques, and that again does take practice, in fact, and seeing the success of just letting silence sit for a moment and then respond. Another thing I find is a lot of times when I meet with leaders, and actually even with improvement professionals, they're very unclear. And some of you who have submitted questions are probably annoyed with me at how many times I followed back around with you to get clear on what your question really was. But when you force clarity, it also makes sure that everyone is on the same page, which makes it less likely for someone to say, no, that's not it. If you force clarity before you even get into those moments so that everyone agrees on what the task at hand really is, that sometimes helps. And then this is probably not something to do right away, but as you're starting to build self-confidence, ask for honest feedback and just listen. Ask good questions that give you feedback, and it may be really hard to hear. I mean, I do this pretty regularly, and sometimes it's really hard to hear, but you have to hear it in order to continue to improve. And so asking your own leaders and peers and colleagues for feedback can be really helpful. And I think I'm a cards on the table kind of gal, and I swear it serves me well. To just admit that you want development, you need help. I think most people generally do want to help. And so I think sometimes just admitting it and reaching out to people and not thinking that that's a sign of weakness. In fact, the more you admit you need help, the more you admit you don't know, that is actually a very strong, powerful, it's a sign of power and strength. So those are some suggestions I have that might help you. I also think that, competence leads to confidence, so becoming extremely proficient in the tools will really help a lot. And then the other thing is that for all of you who ask questions about resistance, again, back to this root cause analysis, when you're experiencing resistance in the moment, you have to think, what's going on? Is it resistance because they're not involved in the process? What's in it for them to make a change or to embrace an improvement in the process, or what's in it for them? Is there something in it for them? If there's not, you may have to find that sweet spot where people will embrace what it is, because there is indeed something in it for them. And then when they're asking, when they're resisting, then you might want to pose back to them, well, why not? Like, what would happen if we tried this? And those kinds of things. Would you be open to trying it for 30 days? If everyone is in agreement but one or two people, that sometimes is the one question that will get folks to say, okay, yeah, I'll try it for 30 days. It's not set in stone. And so that's just a little technique I use depending on the kind of resistance I'm experiencing. So you have to get to the root, and we have to be, better psychologists than perhaps we are at the moment, and just be able to figure out why people are responding the way they are, why they're behaving the way they are. And then through that, then often the solutions become readily apparent. All right, so we have a lot more questions. It is noon. I am so sorry. I should have scheduled an hour and a half for this. I'm going to keep going. I'll keep my eye on the people that are on the phone. I'm going to keep going. For those of you that want to stay on, please feel free. And those of you that, if we get down to 5 people, then I'll go ahead and call it. But we still have quite a few people on the line. So I'm going to keep going for another 30 minutes. All right, another book, Influencer. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend you all read this book, The Power to Change Anything. As a change agent, as an improvement leader, this book is absolutely invaluable. And chapter 3 in particular it really spoke to me. Change the way you change minds. Good stuff in this book, so I recommend that. Okay. So to the anonymous person, I hope some of that helped. And I felt for you when I was reading your question, and so I hope that helps. Okay, Cynthia has a question, and I didn't make a note here on whether I can unmute Cynthia. Hang on one second. Let me look at my little cheat sheet here. Cynthia, hang on one second. I don't see Cynthia listed here, so that must mean no. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and assume no. Cynthia, if you are okay with me raising your hand. Oh, so raise your hand if it's okay if I unmute you. Okay, your hand is up. I'm going to unmute you. Oh, Cynthia, you need to enter in your audio PIN in order for me to unmute you. So it's #, the number on your control panel, and then #, and then I'll be able to unmute you. I'm going to put your hand down, and then I'm going to move on, and I'll come back to you once you've unmuted, okay? So I'll go on to the next one. Okay, question 8. Susan says it's okay to unmute, and our question is, how long should a facilitator be involved in projects to monitor sustainability? So Susan, unmuting you. Oh, Susan, you also need to add the audio PIN in order to be unmuted. So it's #, the number sign on your control panel, and #, and that will allow me to unmute you. So let me go back to Cynthia and see if I can now unmute. Okay, there we go. Cynthia, hi.
Good morning, or
How are
good
you?
afternoon. I'm fine. So my question is, I certify yellow belts. I work in a government situation, more conservative, less accountable, and agree very much to for the necessity of avoiding this elitist core. But I'm asked all the time that people who embrace lean methodology, they would like some kind of acknowledgement of their achievement, of their competence, of their intent to become able practitioners. So is there any lean certification that's equivalent to the more Six Sigma green belt, yellow belt, black belt stuff?
Yes. Okay. So I'll answer your question very directly first, and then we'll get back to the elitist thing. So yes, there is a true certification. It's the only true certification that's out there, contrary to what marketing people will tell you in various programs. It's administered by the Society of Manufacturing Engineers, SME. It was designed in partnership with SME and then AME, which is the Association for Manufacturing Excellence, and the Shingo Prize, it's administered out of Utah State University. And ASQ, the American Society for Quality, is now part of that alliance. It's a true certification in that they have a body of knowledge. They have an advisory board. They meet regularly. I mean, it's a very meaty, intense certification. They have bronze, silver, and gold levels, which I think are their version of black belt, yellow belt, green belt. And then if you visit my Facebook page, I just loaded the link into their site this morning so that anyone who's interested in it can go to my site and then link directly to the page to get more information on it. I believe, now it has changed a little bit, but I met with them probably within 6 months or so. I believe that you can take any training you want and then just sit for the exam. They just want to make sure you get the kind of education and experience that's going to make it possible for you to pass the exam. I don't think there's a prescribed education path, but I think the exams, I believe, are online, and I don't know much about it because I haven't gone through it, but it is, of all the opportunities out there, it's probably one of the meatier one. Now, I'm going to get back for a second to the yellow belt thing. So one of the questions that came in today that we're not really talking about on this webinar was about a person who wanted to get a yellow belt, and there had been a project that was done a year ago that she was trying to use to qualify for her yellow belt, and there was the A3 was used as the format and the reporting format for this project, and when they presented it to the person that certifies you as a yellow belt, they kicked it back and said that there wasn't adequate gap analysis between current and target condition, there wasn't adequate root cause analysis, and this person asked me, what can I do about that? So I went back and said, well, did you do a gap analysis and it just didn't get documented, or did you not? Did you do a root cause analysis and it didn't get documented, or did you not? I mean, the reason why they ask you to walk through a problem that way is to demonstrate proficiency. So what I get worried about are people assuming that yellow belts have a certain level of proficiency that they don't. And so that's the danger I feel there is in any kind of certification or belt thing, that will assume that someone has a higher level of competency and proficiency than they do. But also I understand we're in the West, and West is very label focused, and that's what it is. So I mean, I offer a certificate program internally, so I'm guilty of playing the same game and creating an elitist group within an organization, but it's only as a beginning stage for them to then become the teachers of this and spread it throughout the organization. So, I have opinions about it, but I understand why it's needed. So, and I participate in it.
Thank you, Karen.
So any other questions about the certification that SME has?
No, I think I'll check it out.
Yeah.
But it sounds as if the participants, like practitioners who want that, they have to self-initiate it.
They do, although they may have an organization-wide approach that they would bring in. I've actually talked with a couple people in your organization about bringing in a program internally, and it is just very decentralized as far as who the decision maker is. So I haven't. Oh wait, no, it's not your organization. I'm sorry. No, I'm wrong on that. So anyway, that's the only true certification I know of, and then there's tons of consultants that'll come in and do it for you.
Okay, so I appreciate the information.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, muting Cindy again. All right, so now let's go to Susan, see if we can unmute Susan now. No, we still can't unmute Susan. So Susan, there's an audio pin you need to enter in order for me to be able to, oh, there we go. Susan, are you there?
Yes.
Yay! Success. Okay, so how long should a facilitator be involved in projects to monitor sustainability? So you probably caught a little bit of this in the Kaizen event answer about the model that I find work a lot is a 4-week after the Kaizen event where the facilitator is in that baton passing mode and making sure that the people that actually do the work are taking ownership, and a process owner has been identified, and they have their key performance indicators identified, yada, yada, yada. Now, if you're not using, so are you using Kaizen events, or are you using projects or A3, or what do you typically do?
We're not using A3. We probably do both the other, and we pretty much follow, like you said from that question, we follow your model. We use the event planner and kind of go by that model. We meet every week for 4 weeks, and every couple of weeks for 2 months, and then we meet for every 30 minutes. So we go out a while. It's just I am finding that I've only been in the organization about 2.5 years, and we have some co-facilitators that do projects, but we seem to have to drive a lot of being in the meetings, and although the process owner or the value stream champion or someone is leading the process, it's just we seem to be involved for a pretty good while.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've been studying a lot with Mike Rother, who wrote Toyota Kata, and it's interesting how he has some interesting approaches to words. And for example, solution is a word that you won't hear him say hardly at all. And when I asked him about it, he said it's because the real word is countermeasure. All you're doing is putting something in place to close the gap between a current condition and a desired or target condition. And then the minute the conditions change, then you have to look at it again and again and again and again. So you're always implementing a series of countermeasures. And I think what's happening with Kaizen events in particular is that we're thinking at the end of it that we have a solution in place, and that smacks of permanence. And so people are not necessarily hardwired to do that continuous improvement thinking and continue to watch it and continue to improve it. They just move on to the next project. And Jeff Leiker's new book called The Toyota Way to Continuous Improvement, it just is relentless. He's relentless in saying, you can't do that. That's not what improvement is. Improvement is short term until conditions change, and then you have to do it again and again and again and again. So that may be what makes it so that it's so tough to get people to keep looking at it and sustain it, that we think in terms of solutions. Does that ring true at all?
I think some, yes. We do drive continuous improvement, talk continuous improvement. We do a Lean Into Change class for all of our leaders, anyone coming into the organization. We do a lot of educating, trying to, kind of spread the culture. And we talk about continuous improvement all the time, but I think sometimes they just look to us to, I think, just help lead the process because everyone's so busy.
Right, but that's an interesting thing, and again, I'm shifting my thinking a lot as I find, after doing this for 10, 11 years now, Lean specifically, and then TQM before that, I'm finding that this thing about people being busy is, you're spot on. That is the big thing that you keep hearing, but yet what we have to do is get improvement to be part of daily life, so it's not a separate thing, and that's where our challenge is right now, is getting everyone fully proficient in problem solving and making problem solving part of their job, not something that we do separately. And
I agree 100%.
It's not going to happen overnight, though, as we know.
Right.
All right. Thank you so much, Susan. Okay, moving on. David wasn't able to attend, so I'm going to move on, but this was such a great question. We're into year 4 of our Lean journey, and there are pockets of full adoption, partial adoption, zero adoption, and some skeptics. What are the key elements required to create and sustain a Lean thinking culture? I really needed to ask David some follow-up questions on this in order to be able to identify what some thoughts were. And so I was going to ask him, the ones that have full adoption, what does he see as the success factors behind that, and how does that compare? Actually, this was one where I was going to do a real good coaching thing, or attempt to do a good coaching thing, because how does that compare with the one where there's zero or partial adoption? And help David see what some of those differences are so that he can try to mirror what's happening with the full adoption. So, but unfortunately he wasn't able to attend, so we won't be able to do that. Okay, so this was another good question from Stuart, who has a group of people, so I'm not going to unmute him. But the question is, how do you get buy-in from people, this happens to be an IT environment, who feel that lean adds unnecessary complexity and paperwork into things that should be obvious? So one of the things that Stuart asked was, or gave me as examples, is the suggestion for kaizens met with very cold reception. A resistance to current state analysis and SMART metrics is also met with, kind of resistance, and, well, why do we need to measure this? So what I was going to ask Stuart, which I can't because I can't unmute him, and maybe Stuart, if you're still on the phone, maybe you could write some answers here. I'm curious to know who's driving the need to do the Kaizen. If it's you being in an improvement role, which I think you are, or if it's leadership. Because this is, again, one of those things where if we start with the tools, we're never going to succeed. We have to start with a problem. And the problem and the communication of that problem needs to be a very big part of the planning for anything, whether you use Kaizen events or a project or whatever. What's the problem? And if you can get everyone to agree that there's a problem, then you're halfway there. So that, to me, is the magic elixir for everyone, is to find a way to be very clear on what the problem is, and then get everyone in the organization to see that it is indeed a problem. So then the Kaizen becomes the means for solving the problem. We're putting a countermeasure in place that's temporary until conditions change again. So that's just something that I would think about. And then the other thing is, as far as the current state analysis, it sounds as though there's some impatience around, why do we need to measure this, and why do we need to spend the time on step-by-step analysis. It sounds that's part of it. So one of the things I was wondering is, well, how, have you ever posed what they would suggest you do other than a current state analysis? Most people that want to leap to future state, once you allow them in their head to go there, talk it through, let's leap to the future state. Let's not do current state analysis. What would we do? How are we going to, quote, fix this problem, unquote? And again, that's the sense of permanence. How are we going to fix it? Then when they give an answer, then I'll start asking them, why do you think that will solve the problem? And through coaching and asking questions, they kind of trip themselves up in a good way and realize that they can't solve the problem until they have a full understanding of the current state. So I ask questions about, what kinds of assumptions are you making? Why are you making those assumptions? How do you know that's true? All those kinds of things that then get them to go, okay, yes, I see the reason and the need for doing current state analysis. So those are just two ideas that I think might be helpful. It's unfortunate I can't unmute you because I really would like to get a little more detail on what you've been experiencing. Okay, let's see. I think that might have been it for my questions. Yes, that was it. So before you sign off, I'd like to invite you to ask any additional questions anyone might have. Since we have, I can go another 15 minutes or 10 minutes if you want to stay on the phone for a moment. So go ahead and type in a question if you have any, and let me know if I can unmute you. And then the next thing I was going to mention is, if there are any slides that you want, let me know which ones they are, and then I'll get them posted first thing tomorrow morning, which is usually quite early Pacific time, and then you can go onto my Facebook site and it'll give you a link to them. And then also SlideShare. I'll do it in both places so you can link to it. Okay, so either my Facebook site, which my handle on Facebook is Karen Martin ASSOC, or SlideShare is Karen Martin 2, number 2, Karen Martin 2 on SlideShare. Okay, so are there any questions coming in? If you're typing a question, please raise your hand, and then I'll know that you're typing in a question and I shouldn't sign off yet. Okay, good. I see questions coming in. All right, I'll hold on for a second. I'm actually going to go back to a slide here. So I'm going to go back to David's question, even though he's not on the line, until the questions come in. When I find organizations that have pockets of adoption, I find that it's typically leadership specific. If everyone's been exposed to the same kinds of training and problems have been tackled in each of the areas, and so there's been a lot of applying of lean in an area. It's typically some sort of management resistance that I find that leads to the full adoption versus zero. Now, if everyone hasn't been exposed to the same amount of training, experience with lean, problem solving, then of course that's the answer, is getting more of that in those areas. I also find that, again, back to, I hope I'm being clear on this. When I say the elitist group, it sounds so negative, and I don't mean it that way. But I do mean that when you have a separate team of people that are designated as full-time improvement people, which I agree with. In the beginning of a journey, I absolutely agree with it. But there's a danger in it, and it's that people will often wait for that team to do the work and to come and do for them rather than them doing for themselves. So that message has to be clear from the beginning, that that's not this team's role, that this team is there to teach, and that this team is there to help prioritize and help make sure that improvements tied to strategy and all those kinds of things that will help kind of level out and balance the adoption throughout a whole organization. That's my thoughts. So I think leadership and just the balance of exposure is usually the reason why you've got these pockets of acceptance. Okay, let's see. Oh, so that's not a question. So Carlos, thank you so much. You are more than welcome, and I wish we could have had more time to go more deeply into some of the other questions. Any of you who asked a question, if you want to go more deeply into it now that we do have another 10 minutes, raise your hand again and I'll unmute you and we can go back to your question and go a little deeper. Anybody? Okay, Cynthia, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Okay. Can you hear me, Cynthia?
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, so let me go back to the slide with yours. Okay, so go ahead.
Is there any, so let me ask the question more appropriately. Our deployment model, like lots of others, is becoming a hybrid of Lean and Six Sigma. Do you see any value to maintaining distinctions between like Six Sigma as opposed to Lean certifications or skill set? Anymore, I have trouble remembering what I originally thought was Six Sigma and I'm very much a Lean proponent.
Right.
What I think now is Lean.
So when you
any value between?
Yeah, so when you say that they're being blended, how does that play out? Well, let me back up. Were you primarily Six Sigma or primarily seen in the Lean in the beginning?
The partnership responsible for shepherding this was primarily Six Sigma.
Okay.
Partly because of the familiarization with Lean at this site when they came on board. They introduced a hybrid, and they really lag behind. I mean, the parent company lags behind this site in terms of integrating Lean.
Okay.
But the certifications for Yellow Bus, for example, requires specific Lean tools in addition to the more typical or traditional Six Sigma like Ishikawa or XY diagrams and stuff like that.
Okay, so that's a very interesting point you just made there. So Ishikawa is very much a Lean tool.
Understood.
So it's very interesting how the tools themselves have gotten divided into the two camps. Like, well, that's a Six Sigma tool, that's a Lean tool. I hear it actually a lot, but really, the TQM movement that Deming led, that's when most of these tools were developed. Kaizen events and value stream mapping are, I think, the only two unique tools that we learned through the Lean movement. So almost everything else. Now, the philosophies are different, but the tools themselves are pretty much the same. So when your organization has a problem, what do you do that's kind of more traditional Six Sigma? What tools or what?
The black belts who are like corporate-wide or institutional resources, they approach it with a more traditional Six Sigma, process improvement project orientation.
And
Although
what do you
I
mean by that?
facilitated, well, they use a DMAIC structure.
Okay, so they're using DMAIC instead of PDCA.
Yeah. Now, I have facilitated some broad-reaching, like enterprise-level kaizens, or they were called kaizen, and it doesn't mean that we don't look at data, but I think for the more traditional practitioners and certainly managers who come from that parent company, from that role, their thinking is Six Sigma is useful, Lean is kind of interesting. But I have to tell you, a lot of the people that I come in contact with, probably 300-400 of them, the Lean tools, philosophy, approach is much more appealing. It seems more manageable, might be because it's more relevant, and it's easier for them to explain and engage others to make sure that we solve problems at the lowest level. We engage everybody who touches the work as process delivery work.
Well, I'm asking those questions because I always am curious to know whether the term Lean Six Sigma is being used as a label or if it really is a true marriage of the approaches. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a preview of the book I'm working on right now, which won't be out until next May. I'm taking, for the first time ever, a very public stand on Lean and Six Sigma. And what I'm saying is pure Lean and pure Six Sigma do not go together. Do not. Pure Lean and pure Six Sigma do not play well in the same sandbox together. And this is why I say that. And I don't want to get into a whole thing about it because I'll steal my own thunder. But, I mean, Lean is about workforce development. Six Sigma is about projects being run by a project person. Six Sigma is about extremely detailed data analysis, and Lean is about just the right amount of data. Six Sigma is about variation. Pure Six Sigma, much more focused on variation reduction. Pure Lean, much more focused on flow and removing waste. And yet when people put them together, they put them together because you need both. And so the workforce development piece of it and how the employees and leaders are developed is the biggest difference between the two, and it's one that I do think you have to pick sides. Now, from a tools perspective, I don't think you have to pick sides because they're all the same tools. But so if Lean Six Sigma is being brought together and just putting all the tools in the same toolbox, fine. But the philosophy of how it's being used around an organization absolutely differs. And organizations that are using a workforce development model are really doing Lean. And organizations that are, having an elitist group run everything and not develop the workforce are using mainly a Six Sigma model. So those, to me, are the big differences. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, because I think that organizations choose to blend them for more superficial reasons than technical reasons. And it's just throwing the labels together. So
actually, your explanation is a very useful distinction to make, and thank you very much for the opportunity to embellish my original question. That was useful. That was worth the price of admission.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much, Cynthia. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Oh, it's 12:27. Let's try to get through two more. So I have a question first for Raji. I'm going to put your hand down for a moment, Raji, and then I want you to put it back up if you want to be unmuted and ask a question verbally, because I think that's what you mean, but I want to make sure that's what you mean. So put your hand back up if you want to be unmuted. In the meantime, I'm going to go to the next question, which is written. The question is, what is a reasonable amount of time that should be spent in upfront training to familiarize folks with Lean concepts so that they're speaking the same language and have base knowledge to interact in a Lean culture? Okay, so Jill, I'm wondering if you've been on the whole time. Let me go back to a slide in the very beginning. You may have come on a little bit late, because right in the very beginning of today's webinar, I talked about the different kinds of classroom training based on what you want. So if you want people to just have familiarity with the concepts and the language, I mentioned you could do it in as little as 2 hours. If you were trying to sell them on the concept, as little as 2 hours, probably 4 hours makes more sense, a half day. If you want them to experience Lean, which if you move back to this slide, hang on one second, let me go back. If you look at how we retain information and learning, if you want them to experience it, then they need to see a simulation. And then that means that you're moving into more of a day-long activity for them to be exposed. But remember that if they don't start applying quickly, they're going to lose a lot of what they learn in the classroom. So you want to make sure that if you have any kind of classroom training, that those folks are being, they're kind of being exposed in an application mode as quickly after classroom as possible. They won't retain it otherwise. That said, I do think it's important for organizations to make sure that everyone understands when you're talking about value adding, what does that mean? And so I do think that a general awareness training, using traditional training, is very helpful. So if you want them to, have just that base knowledge, I'd say anywhere from a half day to a full day. I hope that answers. Okay, so Raji didn't put his hand back up or her hand back up, so I think that we're done. Now, Cynthia, your hand is still up, but I just didn't put it down. It is 12:29. Any more questions? Any more, anyone want to raise their hand if they're in the middle of writing a question? I think that's a wrap. So thanks very much, everyone. I would love to actually get emails from some of you about how this worked and how it didn't. I didn't get a chance to do as much coaching as I wanted to. So I'm thinking maybe we do a webinar where we only have 4 kind of cases and we talk through them in detail. I don't know. I'm just playing around with some ideas in my head. I'd love to hear what you all think and what changes you would recommend. You don't really have much chance to do that when you do the survey at the end. So if you want to just drop me an email directly, that would be helpful. Again, check out SlideShare and my Facebook page tomorrow if you want to link to some of these slides. I'm not going to put the questions in. I'll just put the couple slides I had with visuals on it. I'm going back to my, hang on one second. Well, I guess I'm done. All right. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. I hope this was helpful to you, and just keep giving me feedback. I am a continuous improvement freak with my own work as well, so let me know how it's working and how it's not. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon, evening, or night, depending on where you're at. Bye-bye.